Breaking tonight, the highest court in the United States just delivered the most devastating legal blow of Donald Trump's second presidency. The Supreme Court didn't hedge, they didn't delay. They struck down his entire tariff architecture built on emergency powers, and three of his own appointed justices helped do it. Tensions are reaching a breaking point in Washington tonight. For over a year, Trump weaponized a 1977 emergency law to impose sweeping tariffs on nearly every trading partner on the planet: Canada, Mexico, China, Europe. He called it strategy. He called it leverage. He called it national security. The Supreme Court just called it what it actually was: unconstitutional overreach. Everyone believed Trump's tariff wall was untouchable. Wall Street assumed the administration had ironclad legal footing. Analysts expected the court to defer to presidential authority on trade. Political commentators argued that a conservative majority Supreme Court would never turn on the president who shaped it. They were all utterly incorrect. Washington, D.C., February 20th, 2026. Inside the marble halls of the Supreme Court, 6 justices, including Chief Justice John Roberts, Neil Gorsuch, and Amy Coney Barrett, a justice Trump himself appointed in the final months of his first term, delivered a ruling that will reshape American trade policy for a generation. The summary was surgical. The question: does the International Emergency Economic Powers Act authorize the president to impose tariffs? The answer, in 5 devastating words: IEEPA does not authorize tariffs. Translation: the United States Supreme Court just told Donald Trump that the economic weapon he built his entire second term around was illegal from day one. And what happened next reveals exactly why this moment changes everything, not just for America, but for Canada's sovereignty strategy under Mark Carney. Dear viewers, let me walk you through precisely what just collapsed in Washington and why Ottawa has been quietly preparing for exactly this moment. Here's what you need to understand. For over a year, Trump used IEEPA like a presidential credit card with no spending limit. He declared trade deficits a national emergency. He declared fentanyl trafficking a national emergency. And under the cover of those declarations, he imposed tariffs on imports from virtually every country on Earth. Any product, any rate, any duration. No congressional approval, no legislative debate, just executive action backed by 2 words buried in a 1977 statute: regulate and importation. The court's majority opinion shredded that argument with precision, and I want you to hear the exact language because it matters. Based on 2 words separated by 16 others in Section 1702 of IEEPA, regulate and importation, the president asserts the independent power to impose tariffs on imports from any country, of any product, at any rate, for any amount of time. Those words cannot bear such weight. That is not a gentle disagreement. That is a constitutional demolition. The court didn't just rule against Trump's tariffs. They ruled against the entire theory of power that justified them. Now here's what makes this ruling historic beyond the legal arguments. Look at who voted against Trump. 3 conservative justices, Roberts, Gorsuch, and Barrett, broke ranks and joined the 3 liberal justices to form a 6-3 majority. Barrett, the justice Trump personally nominated, the justice he celebrated as his legacy appointment, she looked at his tariff strategy, looked at the Constitution, and said, no. When your own appointees turn against you, that's not a legal setback. That is a political earthquake, and the aftershocks are already spreading. $150 billion. That's how much the U.S. Treasury collected under IEEPA tariffs over the past year. $150 billion that American importers paid. $150 billion that got passed along to American consumers in higher prices at grocery stores, hardware stores, and car dealerships. And now, as Justice Brett Kavanaugh warned in his dissent, Those billions might need to be refunded. Kavanaugh himself called the potential refund process a mess. He's right, it will be chaos. But that chaos belongs entirely to the administration that built its economic strategy on illegal authority. And then the reaction came. According to CNN's Caitlin Collins, Trump was hosting a working breakfast with governors at the White House when he was informed of the ruling. His response? He called it a disgrace. But that wasn't all. Sources familiar with his remarks told CNN that the president became enraged and lashed out at the judiciary, using language I won't repeat on this channel, but let's just say he directed some very colorful words at the courts. You can probably imagine what a furious Donald Trump says behind closed doors when his signature policy just got demolished. He then cut the governor's breakfast short, telling the room he was leaving to make a statement on the ruling. He also told governors he has a backup plan. Now consider the timing. His State of the Union address is scheduled for Tuesday evening. His staff now has to rewrite a significant chunk of that speech. The centerpiece of his economic agenda, the tariff strategy he's championed for a year, just got declared unconstitutional by his own Supreme Court. What does he tell Congress? What does he tell the American people? What does he tell the world? But dear viewers, I need you to pay attention to what comes next, because Washington is not going quietly into the night. The White House has already signaled they will pivot to alternative legal authorities. Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act, the tool used to justify tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum under national security grounds, is completely unaffected by today's ruling. Section 301 of the Trade Act, which targets unfair trade practices, remains intact. They're even eyeing Section 338 of the Tariff Act, a provision so obscure it has never been used in American history, which could authorize tariffs of up to 50% on imports from any country deemed to discriminate against U.S. commerce. The libertarian Cato Institute issued a warning this morning that should concern every trading partner. Unfettered use of Sections 122 and 338, along with better-known statutes like 301 and 232, could essentially recreate the IEEPA predicament. Read that again. They're saying the administration could potentially rebuild the same tariff wall using different legal bricks. The structure collapses, but the architects remain. And this is precisely why Canada's position right now demands surgical precision. Let me explain what Ottawa understands that most commentators are missing tonight. Yes, this ruling is a victory. The IEEPA tariffs that targeted non-CUSMA compliant Canadian goods have been struck down. The legal basis for Trump's so-called reciprocal tariffs is gone. Canada's Trade Minister Dominic LeBlanc responded within the hour, calling the ruling a reinforcement of Canada's position that IEEPA tariffs were unjustified from the start. Industry Minister Melanie Joly confirmed the government is already engaging with the U.S. Embassy. But, and this is critical, the tariffs that have inflicted the most damage on Canadian workers and businesses are still standing. Section 232 tariffs on steel, aluminum, and automotive parts remain fully in effect. Those aren't touched by today's decision. Not 1 cent of relief for the Canadian steelworker in Hamilton. Not 1 cent for the aluminum producer in Saguenay. Not 1 cent for the auto parts manufacturer in Windsor. Matthew Holmes from the Canadian Chamber of Commerce put it bluntly. There will be an inclination to claim victory here, but the reality for business is that we are not seeing the end of this never-ending tariff story. And this is where the Carney strategy becomes essential to understand. While Washington descends into legal chaos, while the White House scrambles to find new statutory authorities, while Congress debates whether to grant Trump explicit tariff powers, Canada has been building something entirely different. Not a response, not a reaction, a transformation. Every trade diversification deal Ottawa has signed over the past year, every new partnership with European, Asian, and Indo-Pacific partners, every investment in Canadian manufacturing sovereignty, every move to reduce dependence on American supply chains. All of that work, the quiet, methodical, strategic work that doesn't make dramatic headlines, becomes exponentially more valuable tonight. Because tonight proves what Ottawa has been planning for all along. American trade policy is structurally unstable. It changes with executive orders. It changes with court rulings. It changes with political moods. You cannot build a national economy on a foundation that shifts every time Washington has a bad day. The markets understood this immediately. Wall Street barely flinched. The S&P 500 rose 0.3%. The Nasdaq climbed 0.5%. Analysts at Wedbush Securities said the market was largely expecting these tariffs to be ruled against. Translation: the financial world already priced in what the Supreme Court confirmed today, that Trump's tariff strategy was built on borrowed legal authority, and the bill just came due. Dear viewers, what you witnessed today is not the end of the tariff war. The Section 232 tariffs remain. The administration will pivot to new legal tools. The threat hasn't disappeared. But the illusion of unchecked presidential trade power? That shattered on the steps of the Supreme Court this morning, broken by a 6-3 vote that included 3 conservative justices who chose the Constitution over political loyalty. And Canada, strategic, prepared, sovereign Canada, is positioned exactly where it needs to be. Not waiting for Washington to stabilize, not hoping for favorable rulings, building an economy that doesn't need permission from any American president to thrive. This is what resilience looks like. Not celebration, not complacency, clear-eyed recognition that the work continues, and the foundation we're building gets stronger with every crack in theirs. If you're watching this channel, you already understand what's at stake. If this is your first time here, welcome to the community that sees the bigger picture. Subscribe and hit that notification bell because this story is far from over, and you're going to want to be here for every chapter. This is Canada Next. Stay informed, stay sovereign.